Recording is in progress. Hi, guys. Oh, it's Michael Redlich. Hi, Michael. Good to see you. Victor Ortega, Luca, Kirill, Anthony Schuber. Oh, lots of familiar names. This is awesome, guys. We're just going to allow the room to fill up a little bit, and then we'll get going. Feel free to introduce yourself into the chat, say where you're from, tell us about yourself, and we will look forward to getting started soon.
I'm just tweeting about this now, but if I tweet this now, do people have to register in advance, or can they jump in right now?
They can jump in now, I think, yeah. Yeah, they just have to quickly fill in that form. They should be able to jump in. And anyone who does miss it, we will have it on demand. We will send an email out in case people share it, and then we'll put it up on the website and YouTube as well shortly after that.
I love the way that as soon as you went live with this webinar, my washing machine decided to go on high spin cycle really loudly. I'm like, now, really?
Yeah, mine like tries to climb out of its little cubby hole.
Right.
I have to push it back. Cool. So guys, if you can see, there is a chat window where you guys can put in any comments. We have the Q&A. Oh,
Michael said the chat is
yeah,
disabled.
I just saw that. Let me undisable that. Thank you, Mike. What a pro.
It doesn't help. Zoom doesn't have very intuitive places for the buttons where what's supposed to be where. It'd be a little confusing.
I like the way that if you move around between like Zoom and StreamYard and Teams and all these different things, you have to remember where they put their sharing stuff or their enable things.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay, I've just changed an option on the chat. Hopefully that is now available for everyone. Do let me know if there's any other times. Aha, there we go. Hi, Mike. Clemson, New Jersey. Great to see you. I'm in Worcester, UK, in between sort of Birmingham and London.
I wonder where you're based. I'm in Seville in Spain, which is usually really sunny, and today is pouring with rain.
Yes, it is the same.
And I'm in Accra. It's very hot. Humidity is almost 80%. So you can just imagine. So I'm blasting my AC off at the moment.
Great. And got Germany as well. That's awesome. 8 inches of snow Tuesday. Oh dear. That would end the UK. Just straight up, just finish off the country. Okay, guys. I think we're mostly here, so let's get started. It's really nice to have you guys here. We have Trisha G from Gradle, and we have Luqman from Payara. They're here to talk about maximizing developer productivity and tools and techniques. They're going to cover all sorts of different things, advanced productivity tools, coding techniques, balancing the quality and the pace and emerging trends and staying ahead. Feel free to put any questions in, and this is going to be, more like a fireside chat. So I can, when there's a pause, I can interject those questions, or panelists, if you can see the chat, then feel free to address those. Anything you are worried about getting missed, then put it into the Q&A, and then I can make sure that I definitely put that forward either during the chat or towards the end. We will have time at the end for any questions. And if you have to go, no problems. We will have this recorded afterwards, and we will put it out to everyone. Great. So thank you guys very much, and over to you, Luqman.
Yes. Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is a very interesting session because we have the legendary Trisha G. Everybody knows Trisha. If you're in the Java community, you should know Trisha. Otherwise, I'll need to have a word with you after this. So we have Trisha here from Gradle. But a word of caution, we are not going to talk about or exclusively about the Gradle build tool. No, we are not going to talk about Gradle build tool. So please, no Maven versus Gradle war here. It's not about Gradle. It's about how you can be productive and get the best of your development processes and everything. So Trisha is here. I wouldn't need to do any introduction. We're just going to start straight away to talk about productivity. I think we need to set the stage. So I will just bring on Trisha and then start with what her definition of productivity is. What is productivity or developer productivity? How does she define that?
It's actually an excellent question, because I think developer productivity is like a big topic right now. I mean, it's always been a topic, because people are always, organizations are always interested in getting the most out of their developers. But it seems to be a hot topic right now about developer productivity. For me, it's certainly not about lines of code or about the amount of writing you do or the number of commits you do. For me, it's about how I feel as a developer. Do I feel like I am producing the things I'm supposed to be producing? And again, I don't mean lines of code. I mean, like, am I able to be creative? Am I able to be innovative? Am I able to solve the problems in front of me that I'm basically being paid to solve? Or am I spending a lot of time in like what we've been calling toil or waste or friction? Am I spending a lot of time waiting for things to happen? Am I fighting with my tools? Am I struggling with processes or, you know, people related stuff? To me, being productive is the ability to actually kind of like commune with my computer and write code. Although, as we know as developers, it's not all about writing code. It's often about communicating with the business and finding what they need, and obviously doing things like tests and releasing the code. So anything which gets in the way of, from the start of that conversation of what do we need to deliver to getting it in the hands of the user, anything which is friction, anything which is like stops that process from happening, that's anti-productivity. And anything that helps me after I've had that conversation about what I'm trying to deliver that thing to the user, that's kind of helping me be productive. That was long-winded. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, so effectively, productivity is reducing as much friction from beginning of the story all the way to delivering that story to the user.
Right, exactly.
Great, great. So then, can you give us examples of less common tools or even general tools that impact real-world development workflows? So because development is always a workflow from point A to point B all the way to the client, can you give us some tools that can reduce as much friction between A to the customer as much as possible?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple of things. One, I think it was really good that both you and Jaden remembered that I work for Gradle now, not JetBrains anymore. So I will still talk about the IDE, even though I don't work for JetBrains anymore, because the IDE is one of the tools. But I don't know if should I start with the IDE? The reason why I'm really interested in productivity is because I spent a lot of time looking at what the IDE gives us as a developer. I was sort of figuring out, why do I love IntelliJ so much, and why am I so addicted to teaching people how to use it to be more effective? And it's about productivity, and it's about again, not about producing more lines of code. I mean, of course, code generation can help you do that, and in current days, things like generative AI obviously can create more lines of code. But one of the things I like about the IDE, when you have a tool like an effective IDE, and when you know how to use it properly, it helps you take care of all of the boring stuff, like the getters and the setters and the boilerplate, and helps you think about like, okay, what's the behavior I actually expect to see in my code? It allows me to run the tests quickly, get feedback quickly, so that I can actually I can verify whether my hypothesis is correct. I can figure out whether my code is doing what I want it to do. So the IDE and understanding how to use the IDE effectively is, in my opinion, like one of the #1 necessary tools of a developer. One of the other things we've been talking about in terms of, from the Gradle point of view, we have this other product called Develocity. My camera's moving around. I'm going to try and stop it from moving around. Hold on. There we go. It should stop moving around, because every time I move, it's been following me. So Gradle has this other product called Develocity, which it works with Gradle, obviously, but it also works with Maven, SBT, and Bazel. And the idea behind this is it's a productivity tool. It does a whole bunch of things, one of which it provides acceleration for your build tools. So it allows you to have local and remote caches for both Gradle and Maven, so that your builds are sped up. And this is an important thing from a productivity point of view too, because one of the things that we often find as developers is, okay, I've used the IDE, I've created this code, it does what I want. Now I'm just going to do a quick build before I commit my code. And the quick build, even the fast ones are like, what, a couple of minutes, 3 minutes. And then, you know, slower ones, 15, 20 minutes. And this kind of like waiting for the build to happen, this disrupts our flow. It takes us completely out of the flow. We either check our email, go and get a coffee, or we start working on another piece of work. And as we know, like multitasking is not really a thing. It's just context switching, and it's just incredibly disruptive to kind of
expensive
develop.
actually, yeah.
Right. Like you think you're doing 2 things at once, but you're effectively doing 2 things badly, and it's taking 5 times longer than it should. So long build times can contribute to that, because you're like, oh, I'm not going to sit and wait for this thing. I'm going to do something else. So Develocity, for example, provides build caching, and it's not, you can get build caching, it's not exclusive to our product. So in order to kind of help your productivity as a developer, you might want to look at build caching for, there's a free plugin from Maven, and there's and Gradle already has build caching enabled. So build caching is another thing to help speed up your builds. And then the other thing that well, there's a whole load of stuff. Like, I don't want to sound too corporate about it, but I'm spending a lot of time looking at Gradle solutions. Obviously, Gradle has a free build scan, which lets you, one of the things I find a lot of developers struggle with is like, if your build fails, whether it's a test failure or a build failure or whatever, if it fails on your local machine, especially if you work remotely, it's really difficult to get help with that failure, because you can't like get someone to look over your shoulder and go, this is the thing, you know, this is the error. So Gradle provides this idea of build scans, which are free, and it will kind of pull together all the information about that build, stick it on a server somewhere, and then you can kind of share that information with someone else. And so that's another sort of productivity tool. It stops this kind of backwards and forwards of like, which operating system were you using? Like, what switches do you have enabled? Like, which version of Java are you using? As well as, what's the error that you saw? What are the dependencies it's pulling in? And all these things that, generally speaking, like, this is the kind of thing that gets in the way of us actually getting our job. We've written some code and then it doesn't work and we can't move any further, you know, like, what do we do now? So obviously I'm going to push the tool of like Develocity from the Gradle point of view, but there's, you know, there's free tools out there as well, like free build caching, free build scans and things like that. But overall, to try and summarize like this area around developer productivity, I think that the thing I've been thinking about a lot in this area is that there's a couple of things. One, there's areas of friction and toil and problems which slow us down that we're not thinking about. For example, the build is one of those things, and troubleshooting problems that happen on our local machine is one of those things as well. That like we just think that's part of our job. We think we sort of have to put up with this rubbish. And so one of the things I think we should be doing as developers is like measuring as much as possible, really. Like, how long does it take us to do stuff? Okay, so we can generate stuff in our IDE in like 2.5 milliseconds, and then it takes us 20 minutes to run the build, or 56 minutes for CI to run all our tests, or whatever it is. And in that time, we're not in the zone, we're not in the flow, we're doing something else, and we're context switching. Nice.
So pretty much, as you said, it looks like as developers, we don't really consider those costs and productivity killers, but as you are explaining, it seems they add up over a period. So over a period of 6 months, 1 year, these small 5-second, 10-second, 1 minute context switches, and all those can really add up.
Yeah, and what gets me about this as well is that it's not just about one developer. If your team's got 20 people in, those minutes timed by 20 people. So that build time times by 20, and it's measurable. You can just figure out what's the average salary of these developers. How much time are they spending waiting for this stuff? It's costing you this much money.
That adds up very fast. Nice. I would want us to circle back to the IDE issue. For those that don't use IntelliJ, I believe all other IDEs also have productivity enhancement and things that they should learn about. So effectively, you are advocating knowing the tools that we are working with, especially the IDEs.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's why, yes, whenever I give my IntelliJ talks, although like I'm a big fan of IntelliJ, it's always pitched like, I know lots of IDEs have a lot of these functionalities, like automatic refactoring. Like the automatic refactoring in IntelliJ is like by far my favorite feature. But it's not necessarily about buying IntelliJ for automatic refactoring. It's about looking inside your IDE for which automatic refactorings are available. What are the shortcut keys? How can I effectively use them? So in order to be productive, sometimes we have to slow down to speed up. We know this, we've heard this before. Sometimes we need to take some time to step back, figure out what our process really looks like, figure out what's really slowing us down, and figure out what to invest in. Should I invest in learning my tooling better, like my IDE? Should I invest in automating some stuff, which I do manually all the time and I don't really think about it, I just do it? Should I invest in learning the next version of Java? Like maybe I'm spending a lot of time writing stuff that I don't need to write because, you know, records exist now and pattern matching exists now. And there are these things in the tools that we use all the time. If we just spend just a little bit of time learning about them and figuring out how to use them, it will make us not just faster, because it's not just about speed. It will free us up to be thinking about the business problem instead of thinking about, oh, what's that key combination? Or, oh, how do I write an old-fashioned switch statement? That kind of thing.
Nice. This is a very important point because sometimes we don't think much about it. My company is using Java 8 or 11, so pretty much that's all I do. But like you really mentioned, learning about these new things upfront will free up more time for you to do other productive things, add much more value to whatever work you are doing. This is very important, and I think developers will need to take consideration of this because a lot of us are, should I say lazy? I wouldn't say lazy, but we are really hesitant to learn new things, especially when we get very comfortable.
I don't think it's lazy or hesitant. We're very busy. We're always busy.
Yeah.
And we're always very focused on the thing we're trying to deliver. And we've been trained that way, especially because traditionally organizations measure our productivity in terms of features delivered or bugs fixed or pushes to production or whatever. So that's why we look at, I just need to get my job done. I just need to do this. I just need to do that. And so it's not laziness and it's not a reluctance to learn. It's that we've been focused in one particular direction. And it can be hard to fight that because, I mean, this is why some organizations have 20% time, because you need to build that time into the organization to say, let's take a day this week to learn about what's in Java 21, which might mean that we have to type less or allows us to focus on. So records is a great example because records is like it's not about reducing the boilerplate. It's about thinking about when I'm creating some customer functionality, all I need is a new record called customer with these fields, right? I don't have to think about getters, setters, hash code, equals. And yes, I could generate that stuff, but records is just there for me. Forget all of that stuff. I have a customer, it has these qualities. That's it. Move on to the next thing. So taking a little bit of time to investigate like what's new, what's relevant, and importantly as well, discard what's not relevant, so that we can really just then focus on what are we trying to deliver and how can I do this without interrupting my flow.
Great. I believe there are a lot of tools that can help in reducing those frictions on the way to delivering value. But beyond that, beyond the tools, what are some personal productivity techniques that you recommend for developers like us seeking enhanced focus and efficiency?
I think this is right. So upfront, I'm going to say I don't really know. I have a lot of tools, and I think this depends a lot of like mental tools. I mean, like processes and stuff. It very much depends upon the individual developer. My friend Helen Scott gave a talk at DevOps last year about interruptions. I can't remember what it's called. It was all about interruptions and trying to stay in the flow. And she's got some great stuff in there about techniques. For me, I like to write lists, and I've started doing it physically with a pencil and a piece of paper.
Wow. Okay.
I always used to do this like in an electronic form or on Trello or something like that. But I've actually found the very act of stepping away from the computer allows me to think about what is it I really want to do. And I include personal stuff on there as well. Like, you know, today I had to go and see the podologist. So put the podologist on there because you need to make space for that in your mind and in your day. And you need to also forgive yourself for not doing as much work because you took like an hour out of the day in the morning to go and see the doctor or whatever. So for me, it's very important at the start of a day to have a list of priorities on what needs to be worked on today. Because the more senior you get, the more pulled in different directions you're going to be, and if you look at the start of your day and you see, you know what, I've got meetings all afternoon, I'm not going to write any code, that can help you feel better about the fact that you're not being productive, right? Or it can help you carve out some space in the morning. You're like, oh, you know what? I do have meetings all afternoon. I need to carve out some space this morning to do this feature or to investigate this problem, or again, pick one thing and decide what to focus on, not just like 2 hours of coding. And so here's another thing. So again, depending on your job and depending upon the challenges that you personally face, you might need to put in your calendar coding time, because otherwise you'll get pulled into different directions. There's a number of reasons to do this. One, so you don't get meetings on trampling all over that time, but two, for yourself to be like, right, this is not time to answer my emails or set new stuff up, or even to fight with continuous integration environment, or something. This is coding time for me to write code. And if you find, when you're in your focus time, if you find there's lots of other things that pop up, oh, I should do this, and I've got this, and there's this tech debt, and this environment doesn't work properly, and the Docker file isn't doing what I want it to do, then in order to keep focus, one of the things I do is I do write that down on a separate list. And so that I don't go, oh, I'm just going to chase down that rabbit hole right now. And at the end of the hour of coding or whatever, you've done like 15 things, but you haven't actually done any of them, So focus time is focus time, and you need to decide on the thing you're going to work on. Anything which isn't that thing, you can make a note of, so that you don't get worried about the fact you're not working on it, but you need to put that to one side so you carry on working on the thing you want to work on. And another technique is to use Pomodoro. So you've got like 20 minutes or whatever of 20 minutes of code time, or 20 minutes of, someone will ask you a question. I get this a lot when people sort of say, I've got this problem with IntelliJ, right? People will often say, I've got this problem with IntelliJ. And so I can easily spend like a day like poking around. Oh, what does their code look like? Oh, look at this. I'm going to go, and you lose like a whole day. So it gets to a point where you don't want to answer those sorts of questions anymore, because it's going to suck you into a black hole. If you have a 20-minute set of time in the Pomodoro, you're like, I am going to spend 20 minutes on this only and nothing else. It helps you to focus, and it helps you to move on to the next thing, whether you've actually achieved what you wanted in those 20 minutes, or whether it's just like, that's the end of your time box. Like, no, it's time to move on to something else. And it helps keep you helps stop you going down into a black hole of something that perhaps you didn't mean to spend all that time on.
Nice. I think this you just summarized what Keller and Papa San wrote in their book, The One Thing. What is that one thing that I need to focus on, such that nearly everything else will just fall in place automatically? And I think what you just said adds up to that. So the writing, and I think also there's a research that says writing helps to connect the information better with your brain. So these are very powerful tips you are really giving us here. I never thought about the writing, because I do lists, but I just use my online tools to do my list. But now that if you are writing, then I should also start writing.
I've only been doing it for, when did I start doing it? Maybe it was mostly this job. Because I like writing lists, and I like writing them in OneNote because it's synced across all my different devices. But what I found about using OneNote is it's too easy for that list to get very, very long, and for you to just carry on those lists from day to day and copy and paste it. If you write it physically, you really only want to be writing 6 or 7 things, like really not much more than that. And that kind of, the physical act of writing also allows you to just constrain your problems to, I'm not going to write the same thing every single day. I've written this 37 times and I haven't done it. I'm not going to do it. Just much more realistic about what you're going to get done that day.
Yeah, this is really true. Nice. So talking about productivity still, we've talked about the abstract tools, and now at the personal level, your number one recommendation is to focus on the things that really matter. Now, beyond that, can you give us some libraries, for instance, in the Java ecosystem? We all know how massive that ecosystem is. Libraries and frameworks that we can leverage to boost our productivity in our code. For instance, you gave an example of records, and records have solved a lot of problems because in the past you need to worry, did I include that field in the hash code? Or no, there is this bug, so why is the set not returning? There's always these subtle bugs that I think records eliminates a whole layer of them. So what are some tools and libraries and frameworks that you know of that you can recommend to us?
So I was actually going to say Spring Boot, but I feel like that's a bit rude given that you're a Jakarta EE shop. So
no, it's fine. I always say Spring is Jakarta's cousin.
Yeah, that's fair. To be honest, actually, the answer is, so this is not a very satisfactory answer. The answer is it depends on you and your team, of course. So for example, like I have used Spring a bunch over the last, God, I don't know, 15 years. So I'm fairly familiar with it. If I went to a team, which was like a Java EE team, I would be looking at what Java EE technologies, sorry, Jakarta EE technologies are helpful for that team, because what you don't want is you don't want people to be learning new stuff all the freaking time. Like we talked a bit about, it is important to learn stuff, but if you have a skill set which is kind of A-shaped, don't make them learn B-shaped stuff, right? Figure out which A-shaped stuff is going to work. So for some teams, like there will be people my age who think that maybe Jakarta EE is like clunky and difficult and boilerplatey. Now, the other day I was upgrading my WebSocket stuff to the most recent version of WebSockets, the most recent version of Jetty. And of course, like everything is much more streamlined than it was like, I mean, we're talking about 15 years ago when it was really bad, right? So like, you know, it's like you said, it's kind of the cousin of Spring, and you have annotations and you kind of like mark what you want the behavior to be. I'm going off on a side note here. The point is, like, the libraries and frameworks which are currently around today, especially in the Java ecosystem, exist because they are useful for developer productivity. They are well known, they're well understood, and they do the job, and they do the job well. So like anything like investing time in learning Spring or Jakarta EE, or years ago, I used to use, what was it called? Drop Wizard before Spring Boot was invented. Yeah, that was great. You just kind of like write a command and it gives you an app out of the box. That's in the days when that was like not really heard of. Of course, lots of things do this now. You have all these different starter apps which will help you do that. Now, anything that allows you to get up and running straight away and doesn't force you to sort of think, oh my God, like, what am I doing? How does this work? How do I do this? You know, anything which can kind of make things easy, anything with great documentation as well. These are the things which are going to help make us successful as developers. We don't want to be, every time I learn something new, if the documentation is non-existent, then I just drop it. I'm not going to do that until someone else has documented it, because it's going to slow me down, even if it's the most productive framework in the world. If nobody's explained it to me or told me the way that it kind of works, I'm not going to be productive with it.
Okay, great. Yeah, you are absolutely right. In the end, you just use the best tools for the job. The tools that you know best is what you use for the job. And yes, Spring and Jakarta EE, I always look at them. I avoid those flame wars because these two frameworks have always influenced each other back in the day when there was J2 EE, and then there was Spring, and then there was Java EE with CDI, and then there was Spring Boot. And so they just sort of keep influencing each other, and having both in the ecosystem in the end is a win-win for us developers, because we have two really strong, powerful frameworks to just get our jobs done, really.
Exactly. And the good thing is that the sort of mental model required is fairly similar. So it's just sort of transferable sets of skills. So basically any framework or library which is similar to something you've used before will be something that you're productive in. I was trying to do some Android the other day, and I was like, I don't stand a chance, because it's like just a completely different model, right? And I couldn't really do it. It's not because Android is bad. This is the answer. The answer is it depends on the team and the person, and like what you're used to and what you've learned, and the mental models that you have.
Yeah. The paradigm shift in Android, I also find it, I go to it once in a while and they're like, this is not for me. Yeah, this is not for me. Yeah, great. I think we have a question that ties into the automation you talked about. Arshad Noor is asking in the Q&A, he says, how does one address supply chain security? Talking about the velocities, caching features and all of that. How does one address supply chain security with centralized repositories that download and include untold numbers of libraries to your build environment? How can one be assured that any of these jars are authentic and that their integrity is intact?
Yes, that is an excellent question. I can't answer that because that's not in my area of expertise at all, but it's absolutely the right question. Like, if you're going to be working in basically any environment, it's important that you understand where your dependencies come from and like make sure there's no some sort of injection attack or whatever. That's not an area that I know very well. It's actually an area I'm going to start looking into quite soon because obviously it's very relevant for a lot of developers, but
if that is of interest to other people as well, Steve Poole, a Sonotype, will be frothing at the mouth at this question.
That's exactly, I was going to suggest Steve. He was my first thought, actually.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe we'll reach out and see yeah, and see if more people are interested in learning about that. Because as you say, it's becoming more and more important all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think at least at in the Java ecosystem, for instance, maybe Central has some basic checks in place. So at least every repository or every library that is posted there, at least we know has been signed and checked one way or the other, unlike other places where anything could be thrown into there. So for now, I think, yeah, we'll need to get somebody else to come on board to talk about security. But yes, this is something that you always have to keep at the back of your mind as well. Trisha, I want us to now transition to talking about code quality, balancing code quality and the pace of development. So what practical tips can developers implement to integrate test-driven development and code reviews into their workflow without hindering speed? Because you mentioned if in an enterprise setting where you have non-trivial tests, it could take quite a while for the pipeline to finish running. So how do we balance, okay, I'm waiting for the pipeline and then I get the coffee and then walk the dog and all of it. How do we balance all these things and not trying to exclusively sort of leave out testing as well?
Right. That is a fantastic question. I recently did a presentation at Devox about that, actually. It was about, are your tests slowing you down? And I looked at it from, you've touched on all these areas really anyway as well. Like I looked at it from several different angles. One, writing tests can slow us down. Two, debugging can be difficult. And three, running them. Of course, like the more tests you have, the longer it will take. So like, I don't want to spend too long answering that question because I literally could spend like an hour talking about this. I think one thing I would like to say, so I'm very pro automated testing. I'm a big fan of automated testing. Once I discovered it in my career, and once I'd seen a team doing it well, it made me realize like how anxious I'd been beforehand that the code I was writing wasn't good enough. Like I used to work with a lot of professional testers who would test the whole application. You know, you write your code, they test it, and then they give it the tick and they launch it into production. This is sort of in the noughties, really. And it was nice to get that security that you've done the right job, but ultimately, you know that people poking around at a website is not really enough to know that you've done everything that you thought you were going to do. And when I discovered JUnit and automated testing, and I was like, oh, you know what? Every time I think, what will happen if the user puts this in? And every time I wonder, what should it do when I do this? I can write an automated test which writes that question down and then pokes the code to see what happens and then effectively documents, I expect it to throw an exception, or I expect it to give the user an error so that they can correct their stuff. So I really like automated testing because for me, it's like really makes me feel a lot less anxious and allows me to be like, right, all the things I've thought about, I've written them down. And not only have I written them down, but they're getting run all the time by a CI environment. So as soon as someone else does something, changes the behavior of the system, it will either still pass my tests or invalidate them. And then we can have a conversation about, okay, which is the correct behavior. So I really like automated tests and everyone should do automated tests. I also like test-driven development because that's kind of, once I learned to think that way, because it does feel a little bit backwards, I realized that doing test-driven development allows me to think about the expected behavior first and then derive the shape of the code from that, instead of being like, right, if I do code first, I go, oh, I need a customer, and the customer needs this method, and then it needs to do that, and then it needs to do this. Oh, but what if I put it the other way around? And what if I expose it here? Or what if I put the behavior on the service? But if I'm doing test-driven development, then I'm like, well, I want to test it from the service level. So it kind of like drives out the architecture. It depends a bit on the architecture of the app, but like it becomes a little bit more obvious where the behavior is supposed to be and what's supposed to be exposed on the API, because I know what I need to give in and I know what I'm expecting back. So that's a long-winded way of saying, yes, testing is good. We should definitely do that. And there are challenges as well, because writing tests for existing code is very difficult if the code already exists, particularly on legacy systems. So that is that can be a real challenge. I think this is one of the areas where I'm a big fan of generative AI, because if you can get it to generate at least the first set of sanity checks to allow you to start testing code that wasn't tested before, like that's great. So that's kind of an aside, really. The other challenge, as you sort of say, is like running the tests. The more tests you have, the more time it's going to take, and the feedback loops become slower, and our builds become longer, and we wait longer for CI. This is definitely a problem, and I've seen this in organizations. A bunch of people have come up to me and said, we've got 1 billion tests, and they take like an hour to, well, hours to run. One of the things here is that not all tests are created equal. So for example, we were talking about Spring. Spring has a nice way of creating integration tests where you bring up the whole Spring framework and you can test the whole application end to end. And it makes it really easy to make these sort of end-to-end tests. But these aren't the tests that we should be writing necessarily. We should have some, probably for the happy path and a couple of miserable paths, but like most of our tests should be unit tests. They should be class level tests. It doesn't have to be necessarily one class, one test. It could be multiple classes and one test. There could be sociable unit tests, but they need to run quickly. We need to be able to press the button on the IDE and it comes back straight away. Yes, everything's fine. And we shouldn't be doing these. Not all of our tests should be these integration tests. Not all of these tests should need the Android emulator. You know, the idea of this testing pyramid, you want to push the tests as far down the pyramid towards these fast running unit tests as possible. You still need end-to-end tests, of course you do, but you shouldn't be testing everything end-to-end, because as you said, everything is just going to slow down. And then what's going to happen is we're going to stop like paying attention to those results. We're going to start context switching, working on something else. And the other problem with some of these integration tests is that, especially if you're relying on external services, you've got network requests or that kind of thing, these tests can then become unreliable because you're waiting for messages, you've got asynchronous stuff going on, and then you end up with flaky tests. And flaky tests is a whole nother story, which I will talk about at some other day. I freaking hate flaky tests, but you know, when you're testing a class, it's much more difficult to get a flaky test, because generally you ask a customer class, what is the name that you have? And it tells you the name. Once you start bringing in databases or services or APIs, or starting things up and waiting for things to start up, the chances of having unreliable test results just get so much higher. And once you've got unreliable test results, you're like, why are we testing this at all? Because we don't trust the results of our tests.
Wow, that is a very comprehensive answer. It's always difficult balancing between the end-to-end and then the unit, but you've made a very strong argument, especially with the pyramid analogy, that the more you push things down the bottom of the pyramid, the faster the turnaround for the entire testing suite. And this is very important because the unit test can be composable. So you have unit tests for this controller and that controller, and then suddenly you are testing every aspect of the application.
Right, exactly. And I think, I mean, testing is an art in its own right for a number of different reasons. Like, it takes a different mindset, but also it's difficult to sort of say these are the rules. Your unit tests need to be one test, one class, and you know, because it starts to get a bit fluffy. Like, let's test a few different classes, but now we're testing a few different classes, but now we've introduced a database connection. That's not really a unit test. Am I going to run all of these tests at the same time, or am I going to split them into fast running unit tests and integration tests and end-to-end, you know? one of the problems with testing is the answer is it depends. Like, what should we be doing? What's best practice? Well, that's going to depend a bit on your application, your infrastructure, and where you're going to run these things. But like, my preference is to push things down the testing pyramid. You should be able to run it on your local machine. You shouldn't have to push your changes to CI to get a check on whether your code does what it's supposed to do. You should be able to run something locally to get at least some sense of, okay, I haven't broken anything, and feel good about it.
Nice, very comprehensive, really. I think we've covered the code base and quality. We can now transition to emerging trends. And obviously, the hottest word now is AI, generative AI. And you mentioned it earlier. Where can we, at what point or in what stage, or what are your recommendations for adopting generative AI into our workflows to help optimize our productivity?
I've given my opinion on generative AI a few times, but I should still caveat that with, we're still in the very early days, not just in terms of the technology, but in terms of figuring out what works best for us. Because I think what you're probably starting to understand is that the answers I have around productivity are not necessarily around tools or like, do this or work like that. It's very much about individual developers, what works for them, what doesn't work for them, what works for the team. And, you know, working with existing processes and tooling and, you know, kind of levels as well. The thing I'm thinking about generative AI is that, and like I say, it's really early days, and I also haven't really played with it as much as I would like to. I would like to spend about 3 years like working on a development team with generative AI before I could really have a good feeling for like what works and what doesn't. One of the things I think about generative AI is that I think if you're a senior developer, like pretty senior developer, like 5 to 10 years plus experience, you can look at something that generative AI has produced and go, okay, that kind of seems fairly sane, or, oh, that kind of feels a bit weird. I'm not really sure if that makes sense or not, because you've already developed these instincts for what code works,
Okay.
maybe in the context of your application, or maybe in a broader context of overall. One of the problems is that junior programmers haven't developed that sense yet. That's fine. That's normal for junior developers, because they just need to spend a lot more time looking at code, writing code, working in different environments, understanding these trade-offs, these decisions that we have to make. So one of the limitations I'm a bit worried about with generative AI is that it's a bit like the concerns we had for Stack Overflow in the olden days. Like, you get an answer on Stack Overflow and you copy and paste that into your code and it works, but you don't know why. But you're like, okay, that's kind of fine. It kind of works. And you've got like usually what, 30 lines of code, and maybe you don't even need half of them, but because you don't know what any of them do, you don't want to touch any of it, right? And it's true of generative AI as well. It gives you an answer and it kind of works and you're like, okay, this is good, but I don't know what it's doing. So I think for more senior developers, I actually think one might think it's less helpful for senior developers because senior developers know what they're doing. They already have their tools. They kind of like don't need help from a pair programmer or whatever. But I actually think that for more senior developers, you get this nice sanity check of like, oh, I was thinking about doing it this way. Like, you know, then you ask JetBrains AI assistant, like, what do you think? Or where do you think this problem is, or whatever? And it can kind of help kickstart your mental process. And that can be quite productive, especially like I always find myself quite, if I don't know exactly what I'm doing, I can get a bit blocked, like, oh, should I go this way or should I go this way? And if I have a pair, whether it's a human pair or an AI pair, that might help unblock me and make me more productive. I think for more junior developers, I think it sounds like it should be better for more junior developers because the AI can write the code for you and then you just plug it in and we all live happily ever after. But we know the reality of the situation is that's not how it works. And junior developers are certainly never going to learn that way. They're not going to learn about like, what is the framework doing? Why does it work this way? Why do I need these lines of code? Or why, when I remove this seemingly innocuous annotation, does everything fall over and die, right? Junior developers, in my opinion, need to pair with senior developers. I'm a big fan of pairing, because a senior developer, and it works for both of them. A senior developer does stuff and it works. And the junior developer goes, why did you do it that way? And the senior explains it to the junior. So the junior kind of learns, or the senior goes, oh, I don't know. I've just kind of always done it that way. And then they kind of discover together, like, what works and why it works that way. I think that's a more difficult experience to get with an AI, because although these are like chat type bots and you can talk to them and you can ask them, why did you do that? But like ultimately, it's not the same thing as asking someone who's been working for 15 years on 15 different projects, like, why did you do that? Well, because I know it doesn't scale this way, and these, you know, I've seen it do this, you know. My answers are very long-winded. So it has good potential for developers, for our productivity. I think it gives us, yes, it can generate code, so it can write code for us. That should make us more productive. Yes, it can help people, set people on the right path. But I also find it quite distracting sometimes. And it, you know, especially if you've got, like, I had the Copilot plugin turned on in IntelliJ, and it was just suggesting things after suggesting and suggesting and suggesting. I was like, could you shut up? Like, I'm trying to think here, right? Like, stop writing stuff for me because I need to think. So right now, like, there's definitely a lot of potential, but to me, there's no clear-cut answer that it works best this way, or it works really well for these things, or it's terrible for this. Like, I think we just need to, the tools need to keep evolving, and us as developers and our teams need to keep evolving and trying different stuff to sort of find out where the sweet spot is for this.
Nice. Just to circle back, your answer, or the way you answer questions, is exactly why we need humans to pair with the seniors, to pair with the juniors, because there is always the gray area. It's not always binary, and exactly the answers you give, it's not binary. There's always the gray area, and some of the things you need to have your fingertip feel, as the Germans would say, to be able to know that this thing is right or this thing is wrong. So yeah, I'm glad you also hold that opinion, because I've read different opinions and online, and it's either people are on the extreme end of it's useless, or it will just supplant everybody, and very soon we'll all be back at McDonald's flipping burgers and all of that. So,
and I don't believe in either of those. I really do think that, I think has the potential to be really helpful to us in the same way, like, so I graduated university in 2001, and there was a thought that using an IDE was sort of cheating. And you're like, what do you mean cheating? This is not like an exam, right? And nowadays, writing Java without an IDE is just basically a torturous, terrible process, right? You just like, you're stupid. And I think AI will get that way too. Like, it's another tool, it's another crutch, it's another thing that we can use. So it's not going to replace us, and we are going to have to learn how to make the best use of it.
Nice. There's a question here in the Q&A that I'm glad if you could take a look at. Saga says, what is your opinion about internal libs and what things we should care about? Sometimes people develop and move to different jobs, then it becomes difficult to maintain. That's why I prefer to stay near open source world.
Okay. So I'm going to paraphrase what I think this question means. As far as I understand it, it's about there's a phrase and I can't think what it is, but it's basically about inventing your own wheel, right? You write your own stuff, and it always come from a place of, I quite often use banks as an example because I worked at banks. Like, at this bank, we need our own custom calculation for interest rates or whatever it is. And so you create your own internal lib or your own internal service to do that thing specifically because your company is special and you need to do that. But then over time, often these things end up, well, interest rates is a little bit like, I don't know, some other sort of percentage. So let's add some other stuff in there, and let's, like, it becomes this kind of like globby mess. Although actually, I wasn't talking about globby mess. If you have your own internal services and your own internal libs, then it does require some sort of expertise to maintain those things, because like someone needs to know what on earth is going on in there. Yeah. Open source is a good example because it's kind of the other end of the world. Like, if there is a open source interest rate generator, then it's quite a good idea to potentially use that. Why should you create your own, maintain your own, and have all the costs associated with that if someone else has already done it? And so, like, my preference is, if something already exists, you should definitely use that, whether it's open source or whether it's something you have to pay for or whatever. Like, I've worked at companies who consistently keep rewriting things like payroll systems or inventory systems, or like, this has been done so many times. Why, if you're a software shop and you've got 100 developers, why would you spend 20 developers implementing payroll when you can buy that for cheaper than 20 developers' time, right? And then those 20 developers are going to have to continue maintaining this thing. And every time there's a new rule or a new tax rate or a new HR thing, they have to maintain that. And it's boring and it's repetitive, and then people leave and nobody knows how this payroll system works. So yeah, I'm a big fan of not doing that. If you can buy something or use something for free, by all means do that, especially if you're a small software shop, because your development resources cost way more than the software is going to cost you. On the other hand, there are things where, let's say you are a bank and you do have your own custom products that you sell, then your IP, your specialness as a bank is those custom products. And so you can't buy stuff off the shelves, and you should be maintaining that stuff. So it's all about like, how special is this thing that you're doing? Is it payroll? Buy it. Is it IP particular to your company? Then you invest software resources in maintaining it. Now, regardless of whether it's an internal lib or something else, there will always be the risk that when developers get bored or get bought out by someone, like, developers will move on. Developers are not going to continue maintaining your piece of software for eternity, because, you know, with any luck, they'll win the lottery and they get to move on, right? So you have to be realistic about the fact that your developers aren't going to maintain this forever. The key is to focus on that, not necessarily to focus on, is it an internal lib or is it open source? If it's something that your company has developed, there needs to be maybe documentation if it's key and it's used by a bunch of people, but definitely automated tests which tell you what's the behavior of this system and why does it behave that way, and what should happen if something goes wrong. Like, if you put in some weird user input, like, what should you do? So the risk of developers moving on and leaving unmaintainable software, like, that's a thing regardless of the software. The key is the maintainability. The code should be easy to read. There should be automated tests for it. Ideally, there would be documentation, whether it's documentation on how to use it or how to get started, contributing to it or whatever. Like, anything which is not obvious from the code needs to be written down somewhere.
Nice. So before reinventing the wheel, there must be a real business case for that. It shouldn't be reinventing just because you can reinvent the wheel.
And we love it. We love to reinvent the wheel. Like, who doesn't want to build a better payroll system? But like, if your company sells cars, you're not doing a payroll system, you're selling cars. Yeah.
It's a trap that a lot of developers fall into, or shops fall into, and then you have Hydra-headed code that cannot be maintained, cannot be discarded. And it's a constant source of stress and all that. So the first rule of thumb, as you are explaining, is a business value. There must be a business case for that. And then if you are reinventing the wheel, obviously you want to have it in such a way that it's maintainable by the next person that comes to take over.
Yeah.
Nice. So I hope that answers your question, Sarah, so that before you jump on creating the next payroll, just remember there's a lot of payroll companies out there you want to just subscribe to, really. Yes, Trisha, so emerging trends and staying ahead in the Java ecosystem. Java has changed tremendously over the last few years, the release cadence and the features and everything. Java of today is really, anybody comes back to Java today, it's like two complete worlds from the days of Java 7, Java 8. So what new tools and trends in the Java development landscape hold the most potential, in your opinion, for developer productivity gains?
For developer productivity specifically, I think all the stuff that I was going to say Oracle, but all the contributors to Java, the language, what they do in terms of trying to make the language easier to write, but mostly easier to read. So stuff that kind of seems like stupid. I used to think this is, here's the thing. I used to think that reducing boilerplate was stupid, because as developers, we get used to reading the boilerplate. Public static void main. Okay, I know that's a main method. I don't read every word and I don't waste a lot of time reading it. However, and so I was like, who really cares about boilerplate? You know, your brain just grays it out,
Fills
and your
it in,
IDE folds stuff that you don't care about. However, there is a cognitive load to understanding a lot of stuff, especially like records. And let's talk about records again. Records is great because when you see a record, you know it is a data class with these fields, with effectively getters, no setters. It has getters, it has toString, hash code, and equals, and that's it, right? But if you saw in your code base a customer class with fields, which are final, you've got fields, you've got some constructors, you've got some getters, you've got hash code, toString, and equals, you have no guarantees at a glance that that is purely a data class that never changes. There might be, I don't know, reflection might change it under the covers, or the toString implementation might be subtly different, or like, God, heaven forbid, something like the hash code actually makes changes to the fields under the covers. You know, you don't know, because you would have to read every single line of code to make sure that really is an immutable data object. So some of the stuff that Java's been doing in terms of reducing boilerplate and using understandable patterns helps us in terms of productivity, because we don't have to think about stuff. We're like, oh, it's a customer record. Okay, it's a customer, it's got these fields. I don't have to think any more about that. To some extent, pattern matching as well, which I don't know that well, but pattern matching has some interesting potential as well. So I just kind of, once I understand how pattern matching works, when I see that pattern of code, I know what it's doing and I know why it works that way. So there's a lot of things which have been happening in Java, the language, which help us productivity wise, because they kind of reduce boilerplate and reduce the cognitive load of thinking through, does this code really do what I think it does, or is it doing something odd? And a lot of Project Amber is in that scope. One of the other areas which I don't know if it's going to impact productivity per se, but it might do, but it's really interesting, is Loom and modern concurrency. So I'm really interested in what's happening there. I haven't poked it very much, but I think I'm interested to find out what the potential is there, because like years ago, when I first graduated and started looking for jobs, lots of interview questions were around threading and thread models and multi-threaded, and it was difficult, you know, and you had to spend a lot of time thinking about, why is the synchronized keyword here, and actually why is my data changing when it shouldn't change, and it was dreadful. Modern world, not just modern Java, the modern world has changed a lot of that, because our programming style has changed and we tend to use immutable data, which is helpful. But I'm kind of interested in seeing how the new concurrency stuff with Loom and structured concurrency, like how is that going to change the way that is it going to change that we write programs? Is it just a tool for libraries and frameworks to use to give us better performance? Is it something which is going to open up different ways of doing stuff that we haven't thought about? Like, I think that's kind of interesting, and I'm going to keep my eye on that.
Nice. And since we are almost at the top of the hour, finally, what advice do you have for developers who want to contribute to the growth and improvement of the Java community?
My number one piece of advice for Java developers, full stop, is if you can, join a user group. I know that joining a user group requires you to invest your own time out of hours usually. And I know that now I'm a parent, I don't go to my local Java user group because I've got kids to take care of, and it's in the evenings. And I know there are challenges to joining a Java user group. But honestly, joining the Java user group was really like fundamentally changed my relationship with the Java community, and also enormously leveled up my career as well, because I learned a lot, because you learn a lot by going to these events and by listening to people and by talking to other people who do the same job as you in different companies. But it also allowed me to give back as well. Oh, I can talk about how the JCP works, or I can talk about top tips for IntelliJ IDEA. And I can start all this stuff that I learned the hard way in the first 10 years of my career. I can start giving that back to other developers who haven't learned that yet, and help them like level up faster. So like, I'm a big fan of Java user groups. The virtual Java user group is just about to start up again. So if people don't have a local user group or find it difficult to physically go out and join the user group, then the virtual Java user group is quite a good way to at least hear more, learn more, and interact in a session like this with, you know, chat and stuff with other developers, and figure out basically what's going on out there and what's important to them.
Nice. Yeah, the virtual Java user group was something I was also a fan of because there's not an active Java user group in my part, or at least in this country. So I really was a member of that. And thankfully, it's coming back. So really, that's great. We have a final question here, and it's the obligatory Maven versus Gradle question. Mike Relich is asking, essentially, why the industry hasn't adopted Gradle as a viable alternative to Maven.
About 15 different answers came to my head. So firstly, yes, I do work for Gradle. Before I joined Gradle, my preference was for Gradle, but I was not militant about it because, as Michael says, like, you move to different companies and some of them use Gradle, some of them use Maven. Open source projects use a common, and you have to be bilingual in Maven and Gradle, right? My opinion, my first answer to that would be that there's a lot of Java projects which use Maven. They're mature Java projects which have always used Maven. And like, why would you migrate your build tool? Like it is risky. We do see it at Gradle. We do see people wanting to migrate from Maven to Gradle. But one of the reasons why Develocity works with Maven and Gradle is because we don't want to push people to move away from Maven to Gradle, because like, why would you want to spend a lot of time migrating your build tool? It's a lot of work, and the end result is your build might be faster, but it might also be different and it might be broken. So there's a lot of Maven projects out there because once you have a build that works, like, you don't really want to touch that. We find the statistics we have at Gradle is that in the open source community and GitHub, etc., there are more Gradle projects than Maven projects, and generally new projects are Gradle rather than Maven. However, realistically, in the real world, enterprises have been using Maven for a long time and will continue to use Maven even for their new projects. So basically, it's about, to some extent, inertia, but I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that in a kind of like, it's okay to keep using something if it works and it does what you want it to do. And so that's one of the reasons why Maven is still very successful. And also, like, lots of people know Maven, and I speak to people in the industry, like other Java champions and people like Josh Long and Justin Lee. Like, both of them are just like, I just prefer Maven. I know how Maven works. I know how to get it to do what I want it to do. I don't want to have to relearn that stuff for Gradle when Maven does it perfectly well for me. One of the things, as a slight aside, one of the things I really like about our approach at Gradle in terms of the developer productivity stuff is to fully embrace Maven as a valid choice and not be like, well, you're using Maven, we don't care about you. Develocity works with Maven and Gradle. We just, at the same time that they hired me, they hired Brian, who's a Maven expert. And the idea is that we are going to help developers become productive in the build tool area with both Maven and Gradle, because like, that's just the world that we live in, and we shouldn't be fighting with each other. We just embrace the fact that it's okay to use the tool that works for you.
Nice. Okay, Mike, hopefully that answers your question. And again, ties back to what Trisha said earlier. If there's no business reason, there's no business value, why would you want to move from one to the other, whether maybe to Gradle or Gradle to maybe? In the end, it's always, or it should always be, a business decision picking a tool. So what works best for the particular context is essentially what should be used. So Trisha, thank you so much. Thank you so much for this chat. It's been worthwhile learning a lot from you, and I think we should meet up some other time. This time around, code demo, so you take us through Develocity, because I've read about it and I'm also curious how it works and all that. So we should arrange another session where you run us through all the value propositions of Develocity, so we can, as developers, we can get more productive and deliver better business value to our users. Okay, Jaden, since you're on screen, I'll just hand over to you, and then we arrange the next one with Trisha down the line, because it's fun talking to Trisha. There's so much to learn from Trisha, and I would want us to do another one with Trisha to learn more.
For sure. Yeah. And also, you know, there might be a few in-person events as well. Luqman's going to be in Germany a bit this year, Javaland and such. So we might cross paths with one of those events. But thank you guys very much. There are some links in the chat, guys. Have a look at them. I've linked to Develocity and some of the Payara resources, and the other pages that.
Buy my book. Please buy my book.
Yeah, There we go. Oh yes, I remember this is the one you've been talking about recently with there was some like there's a free chapter of it or a free version of it. Yes. Yeah, yeah.
There is. If you go to LeanPub, so the book is split into 4 parts. The first part is completely free. It's the community version.
Yes.
And then parts 2 and 3 are tutorials, which are also available as a course if people are more interested in the course type thing. And then the 4th part is the sort of experienced users, FAQs, like how do I do this stuff with run configurations kind of thing.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, check that out, guys. Well, thank you guys very much. And until the next one.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye.